It will be a day one priority to fight to bring down prices. I will take on big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging.
She's running on the Maduro plan. We call it the Maduro plan, like something straight out of Venezuela or the Soviet Union.
Well, we finally have a bona fide economic policy from the Harris campaign, and we're going to spend some time talking about it because apparently what didn't work for Joseph Stalin, what didn't work for Mao Zedong, what didn't work for Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez, it's going to work here, damn it, because Kamala Harris is bringing joy to communism. Take a look at this.
We believe in a future where we lower the cost of living for America's families so that they have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead. Because while our economy is doing well by many measures, prices for everyday things like groceries are still too high. You know it and I know it. You know, when I was Attorney General, I went after price-fixing schemes. And when I am president, it will be a day one priority to fight to bring down prices. I will take on big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging. I will take on corporate landlords that unfairly raise rents on working families. I will take on big pharma and cap the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans. And continue to bring manufacturing jobs back to America.
Nothing brings back manufacturing jobs to America like price controls and the threats of prosecution for corporations for actually following market demands for pricing. Akash, there's so much to unpack here, and we've got more to discuss as well. So let's, like I said, take our time on this segment. I first find it very instructive that Kamala Harris is pretending like she has no say in the current administration, considering she's vice president in the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. If she's got all these great ideas, why not implement them, number one? But number two, she goes back to the time when she's attorney general and talks about fixing the economy as some kind of prosecutor. That's fascinating, isn't it? She doesn't say, you know, when I was a senator or while I've been vice president. No, we're going to go all the way back to when I was an attorney general and I went after companies for price gouging, as if that's why we have inflation, Akash.
It is just so beyond ridiculous. To your point, Larry, I don't even know where to begin. To quote another famous Democrat, ideas like this rely on the stupidity of the American voter. The American people are not stupid enough to fall for this. All this is Kamala Harris needing something to say on the campaign trail. She needs a one-line response to deflect blame from herself and from other Democrats for this inflation crisis that they created with their own trillions of dollars in reckless spending. And this is the best they could come up with. You know what the profit margin was for grocery stores last year, Larry? It was 1%. Grocery stores had a net profit of 1% last year, and she thinks they are price gouging. It is absolutely ridiculous, has a history of failure everywhere it's ever been tried. The American people are not that dumb, and she will ultimately pay the price for this if conservatives go out and make the case and explain this to people. And it shouldn't be that hard to do. When government's in control, prices go up, supply goes down, and you end up with empty store shelves like they have in socialist countries all over the world.
And Akash, if I could, because you guys at AFP are so all over this stuff, I've already learned a lot just from going to the website because you're so out in front of it. Before a person running for president makes these kind of threats and these kind of accusations about corporations and the grocery industry price gouging, shouldn't they be compelled to bring one piece of evidence to the table? Can't they show us one example? Look what Kroger did here. But they're not. I would think that they would be incumbent to do that before they just, assume that this is what's happening.
Doesn't exist. This administration did quite the opposite, Larry. Not long ago, they were celebrating inflation slowing down in the food and grocery industry. The White House has tweets about this. They put out pie charts about this, celebrating that inflation slowed down in this very industry. And I would love to know, is it that when inflation is low, corporations are not greedy, but when inflation is high, then corporations are greedy? I mean, tell us what to think at any given moment, depending on where inflation is. I think the big lesson here for Republicans, for conservatives, is we will never out class warfare, anti-corporate, out government spend, or out sort of prosecute our way to electoral victory. Those ideas are reserved for Democrats. They're dumb and they have failed over and over again. So we might as well run on free markets and economic opportunity, because that's what people really want after 4 years of Bidenomics has made their lives absolutely miserable.
Well, and Patrice, economics is your wheelhouse. I know. I've seen you testifying on it and all over the place discussing it. You did fact check on this very issue this week, didn't you, for Independent Women's Forum? And they really don't have the facts on their side when it comes to suggesting that corporate greed is what's behind higher prices.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So looking at whether the elevated inflation rates we're seeing and just higher prices are due to price gouging or greedflation, whatever name they're using, flavor of the week is. And I look back at the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank and some of their research looking at whether that's true, and they found that's absolutely false. You would have to see widespread evidence across every industry, because we're not just talking about grocery stores and gas pumps. We're talking about school books. We're talking about airline tickets and hotel fees. We're talking about haircuts and kids' shoes. We've seen the cumulative effect of 3.5 years of increased prices being 20% overall. It's not just in one industry, one company, as Akash was saying. This is widespread. And so there's absolutely nothing to the idea that this is about price gouging. And in fact, when you look at corporate profits from the start of the pandemic to now, yes, they did increase during the pandemic, but they are pretty much back to where they were right before the pandemic hit, which tells us that the continued high prices right now is not because of corporate profits being, skyrocketing through the roof. They've actually come back down. Listen, the idea of price controls, just think about rent control. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, rent control didn't work in New York City. It's why it didn't work in Boston. That's why a lot of these major cities moved away. And the perfect example is the Afghani princess, royal member, living in a rent-controlled apartment, paying a couple $100 a month with sitting on a massive family tuft because of rent control, because it's been passed down from generation to generation. You spread price controls from housing, you put that in food, you put that into medicine, and that's where you start to see massive pain across the board,
right?
Loss of property and everything else.
Right. Government price controls on any good or product or service ends up creating a shortage, which of course then drives prices up because there's less supply and more demand. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not that complicated. Matt Foldy, let's get you in on this as well, because there's also another aspect of this. This is typical, sadly, Democrat politics, where instead of actually bringing a solution to a problem, they find a villain and they point the finger at them. It's their fault. And it's frankly divisive. It actually pits people. It's class warfare. This, sadly, is what we've seen since the Obama era.
Yeah, it's interesting. They are sort of, at least in this instance, reverting back to the Obama/Bernie 1.0 class warfare instead of race division. Don't worry, they'll come back to that. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. I think that Democrats, you oftentimes hear these people say, real socialism has never been tried, right? I think the premise of this policy is real price controls have never been tried. Now, of course, the problem is they have. And I went to the University of Chicago, very well known for econ. I was actually the only political science major who never started as an econ major. But Larry, right at the end, you basically laid out what anyone who didn't take Econ 101 would know, which explains why price controls aren't going to work. And what I think you're seeing here is much like with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is now shooting from the hip, right? You see Joe Biden, even just recently, he would say things like, we need new elections in Venezuela. Actually, wait, we don't need new elections in Venezuela. And as far as pointing to an example, don't be so ridiculous, right? Joe Biden, who is still the president, last I checked, recently floated out of nowhere a proposal for nationwide rent control that I think they've since walked back. But right now you have, with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, you have a president making policies that his staff are then walking back. And then you have the vice president, who's now running for president, making no policies herself. They're all through an aide said, a senior advisor said. It is very weird what's going on with these two people. It's like they're complete empty vessels for basically, in stalking horses, for the left right now. And that's where I think you see these insane demands for price controls coming from, right? The DNC is kicking off next week. So you've got the Jihad Caucus descending on Chicago, and they need to appease them.
Yeah. Listen, Matt, actually, a quick follow-up with you, because you're right. There's no walking this one back. This is their first big ballyhooed presentation. This is going to be their policy, and it's going right into the DNC next week. But, you know, if you're Tim Kaine right now, and you're trying to win re-election in Virginia, and you've got to answer for this. If you're Senator Tester right now, you can't be happy with the march toward communism here with price controls. This is going to hurt down ticket.
I think you can be happy, though, because you see the left basically cropping up these fake news outlets in states like Virginia, for example. There's one called The Dogwood that exists just to run Facebook ads masquerading as news that are actually just ads for the Democratic Party. I mean, they have plowed hundreds of millions of dollars via people like David Brock, who was one of the Clintons' antagonists turned lapdog. And they are running very cleverly. This is important, I think, for viewers to realize. This happened in 2021, for example, in Virginia for the governor's race, and across the country in 2022 in the midterms. They are sending mailers designed to look like local newspapers to very highly targeted voters to try and get them to vote for Democrats. So if you're asking, am I optimistic that the local media in Missoula is going to ask John Tester about Kamala Harris's price fixing? Boy, oh boy, am I not expecting that to happen. I think that they just understand they can wait this all out and hope that there's no accountability for them. Now, obviously, there should be, and that's incumbent on the Republicans to make happen.
Yeah, I would think that Tim Kaine does not want to answer a question about whether he supports Kamala Harris's price controls on agriculture, not in Virginia. Kosh, you have been almost begging the Trump campaign to focus on issues like this, focus on inflation, focus on the grocery store and kitchen table issues. Yesterday, Donald Trump did give a presentation. I want to show you a couple of moments here and get your review on how he did. Let's take a look at this first.
She's running on the Maduro plan. We call it the Maduro plan, like something straight out of Venezuela or the Soviet Union. This announcement is an admission that her economic policies have totally failed and caused really a catastrophe for our country, and beyond that, a catastrophe in the world.
Yeah, and to have the groceries there lined up behind him, I think, was a good visual impact. And here's a quick social media video that was produced that I think is pretty effective. Watch.
This is the cost of food. This is the cost of your basics. Every single thing is up. Eggs up 48%, cookies up 27%. Look at what's going on. Butter up 31%. And this is just the beginning. It's a disaster.
Yeah, and Akash, this actually ties in with the TikTok trend of people taking a look at their grocery bills or their Uber Eats bills from 4 years ago, because you can see it in your history, and then looking at what the exact same basket of food costs today. This is good. This is effective. This is the message we need, isn't it?
Yeah, that line about the Maduro plan, I really like that because, look, people have been calling her a socialist or like a cover-up communist and things like that for a long time. And they've been deflecting from it. And then she rolls out a price gouging and rent control scheme. I mean, you're not really doing yourselves many favors. Trump is obviously familiarizing himself with this line of attack on her. She's hopefully making it a lot easier for him today. And look, if you ever wondered whether or not these down ballot races matter that you and Matt were just talking about, I mean, to your point, does Bob Casey, Tim Kaine, John Tester, do they want to support Maduro-esque price control schemes? Because look, if Americans were mad about empty grocery store shelves a couple years ago, just wait until this scheme goes into effect because those guys pass it into law in 2025. So she can lay out all the nonsense she wants. If those guys don't win re-election, none of it goes anywhere, obviously. And so to your point, Larry, every single Democrat running up and down the ballot should be asked whether or not they support this nonsense, because ultimately what it's going to mean is higher cost, empty store shelves, and fewer jobs for the American people in all 50 states if this stuff comes to reality.
Thank you. I mean, forget about the local media. During the debate, when McCormick turns to Bob Casey and say, "So you're on board with this Fidel Castro plan, are you, Bob?" I mean, that'll be a devastating moment. This is going to kill those campaigns, I think. Patrice, let's get you back into this because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden had a moment in Prince George's County in your neighborhood, actually, if I remember right, where they sort of had it was the pass the baton moment, right? And I want you to look at the dynamic between the two of them. Take a look at this.
2 years ago as vice president, I was proud to cast the tie-breaking vote that sent the bill that gave Medicare the power to negotiate and let it get to the president's desk. And I was proud when our president, Joe Biden, signed that bill into law.
I mean, Patrice, that's kind of a smoking gun moment there. She's admitting to the crime. I mean, she passed that and she's proud of it. And that right there, that could be an ad for Trump right now, because that's the bill that ended up costing everything so much more.
Well, yeah, I think that she's talking about 2 years ago. So the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really the non-inflation reducing act, there was really more just the green radical green agenda act, dressed up under the guise of inflation to get Joe Manchin to vote in support of it. So this makes it very difficult for her to distance herself from Bidenomics. Inflation Reduction Act was a core aspect of Bidenomics, as well as the American Rescue Plan, which provided those stimmies with Joe Biden's signature on them. So she can't now go around and say, oh no, I'm going to fix my day one priority is to bring prices down, when number one, you and Joe Biden drove prices higher, and then you and Joe Biden did nothing to really bring them down. What's brought prices down has been, cooling down the housing market through higher interest rates, and frankly, just time, and ending the incentives that kept people from working, which made it difficult for producers to produce and meet the demand, the increased demand from all of the increase in government spending. So, it's going to be hard for her to pull back. And I just got to say, when she's proposing price controls, it's also going to make it difficult for her to claim to be a moderate, to be a centrist, to say that she's not as radical as her past positions have been. Not only is she tied to Bidenomics, but she's now proposing ideas that are farther left than probably Bernie Sanders. I mean, maybe Sanders might appreciate them, but
it's certainly to the left of Joe Biden.
Other Democrats.
Anybody anticipated her first big policy initiative would be an economic proposal to the left of Biden and to the left of where we've been for the last 3.5 years. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a great point, Patrice, and we'll leave it there. I will say, though, this whole idea of a $25,000 grant for first-time home buyers, because we have so much money lying around in the federal government, I, for one, am super excited about that, because this guy's house just got $25,000 more expensive.